3, 2, 1.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So in continuing discussing the book Bulugh Maram, we're discussing a hadith that relates to ahkam, and we're discussing concerning Kitab al-Buyu, where we're discussing the hadith that have been mentioned regarding, as the author rahimullah he mentioned regarding shurut al-Buyu. So those things that are considered to be of the shurut al-Buyu, that and also manuhi anhu minhu, and also those things that have been forbidden. In discussing outlining some of these things that we'll be discussing, in continue discussing those things, we'll be discussing concerning hadith that is mentioned next, with the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud. So I'll read the hadith and then we'll start to go through concerning the ahkam and the related matters relating to this particular hadith. Aywa.
Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. Chapter 7, the Book of Business Transactions, page 253, hadith number 650. Narrated Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu an. I heard Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, when two people who are arranging a business transaction disagree and there is no proof to arbitrate between them, the seller's word is final or they may break the deal. Reported by Al-Khamza, reported by the five, and authenticated by Al-Hakim.
So the hadith that is mentioned here as read is the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud regarding concerning this discussion regarding shurut al-bay, that regarding the conditions that are related to business transaction. So as the system that we follow, that will be explaining concerning this hadith, but before we go into discussing the hadith, we'll mention regarding one, matters relating to the Arrawi, discussing certain matters regarding the narrator. Then second, we go into a takhrij of the hadith. Then we'll discuss concerning the meaning of the hadith, and then also we'll discuss concerning the fawahid and ahkam and the masail that can be taken from the hadith. So starting concerning one, regarding concerning that the narrator, some matter relating to the narrator of the hadith that he mentioned, and Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إذا اختلف متبايعان وليس بينهما بينة فالقول ما يقول رب السلح أو يتتاركان رواه الخمسة صححه الحاكم. So that's the hadith that we are discussing. So as for the matter he discussed concerning first, is the hadith he mentioned and Ibn Mas'ud. So we'll discuss something regarding Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. So as for Ibn Mas'ud, that was a Sahabi al-Jalil, that his name is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud ibn Ghafir ibn Habib al-Dhuhali. So that's concerning Ibn Mas'ud. So it's Abdullah ibn Mas'ud ibn Ghafil ibn Habib al-Dhuhali. As for his kunya of Ibn Mas'ud, his kunya is Abu Abdurrahman. So his kunya is Abu Abdurrahman. As for Ibn Mas'ud, that of those who accepted Islam in the early days. So his father, as mentioned, that his father did not accept Islam. But as for his mother, she accepted Islam. So his father, he died in Jahiliyyah before Islam. But as for his mother, that she also, with her son, that they both accepted Islam. They both accepted Islam. And also as for Ibn Mas'ud, regarding concerning that he's of those ones who accepted Islam early, so amongst those who were the foremost and the early ones who accepted Islam. So he was then in the first 10 of the Sahaba who accepted Islam. So Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu amongst the early ones who embraced Islam. Then as for, they mentioned regarding concerning Ibn Mas'ud that he was maybe the sixth amongst those who accept Islam early, so amongst the sixth person to have accepted Islam in the early days of Islam. So as when Islam was preached by the Prophet ﷺ, of those who first embraced and accepted Islam, amongst them Ibn Mas'ud. Also Ibn Mas'ud, he participated in a hijrah, both to Al-Habasha, and also he made a migration to Medina. So the first migration to Habasha, and also he made a migration to Al-Madinah, to establish in Medina. Also Ibn Mas'ud, that participated in many of the battles. So he participated in the Battle of Badr and also the other mashahid, also the other battles with the Prophet ﷺ that came after. Also Ibn Mas'ud, that he said and counted as one of the ulama among the Sahaba, so one of the fuqaha among the Sahaba, because of his great knowledge, and also his piety. So he was known for these things. So he is considered amongst one of the ulama, one of the fuqaha amongst the Sahaba, one of the ulama amongst the Sahaba. Also Ibn Mas'ud, because of his knowledge and his status, that Omar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he was the Khalifa, that he appointed him one to be the person responsible as a qadi, a judge, and also for him to be the one responsible also for the Baytul Mal. So concerning the Baytul Mal, that he was responsible for this Baytul Mal of the Muslim, and also he was appointed as a qadi by Omar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. And also that Ibn Mas'ud, that also he continued to serve in those positions up until the time of Uthman ibn Affan. So in the early years of Uthman ibn Affan as being the Khalif of the Muslim, then also Ibn Mas'ud also held this position. So initially he had moved from Medina to Al-Kufa and then held those positions while in Kufa, and also he returned back and reside in Medina. So Ibn Mas'ud, he came back and resided in Medina, and as mentioned by the ulama, that he died eventually in Medina. So he died eventually, Ibn Mas'ud, that he died eventually in Medina, and he was buried in Al-Baqiyah, in the burial ground in Medina. And the ulama, they disagree regarding after the year that he died. Of those who mentioned that they mentioned that he died concerning the year, that was the 32nd year of the Hijrah, that he died the 32nd year of the Hijrah. So it's concerning matters in brief regarding Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. So the next of those things to be covered is regarding the second matter, which is regarding concerning a takhrij of the hadith, meaning takhrij of the hadith, that it is two processes that we will follow. One, mention some of the sources of the hadith, the books of hadith that have mentioned this hadith, and also second, the hukum upon the hadith. So second, we'll mention also the hukum upon this hadith based upon the aqwal of the ulama of Ahl al-Hadith. So regarding concerning this matter, regarding concerning the hukum upon this hadith, that we find that there's before we go into the hukum upon the hadith, we just mention concerning that different books that have are different of those who have worked on the book of Bulugh al-Maram, that what they have said regarding takhrij of the hadith. So we mention various books, around 4 comparison regarding those who have worked around the book of Bulugh al-Maram, and what they added regarding footnotes regarding the takhrij of this hadith. So as for the first, regarding what is mentioned here regarding takhrij of the hadith, that with this checking of Bulugh al-Maram, which is the print of Sheikh al-Samir al-Zuhairi, that he mentioned in his print, that or in his print, and checking when he mentioned the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, and he mentioned the hadith that have been read, they mentioned that Rawahu al-Khamsa wa Sahahu al-Hakim, that the hadith is rated by al-Khamsa. So al-Khamsa, this would be, as he mentioned here concerning that in his footnotes of number 3, mentioned Sahih, that the hadith by way of his hukum, it is Sahih. Then he mentioned Rawahu Abu Dawood, in his, and he mentioned number Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, and also Al-Hakim. So he mentioned that the hadith, based upon what had been mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, when he mentioned Rawahu Khamsa wa Sahahu Al-Hakim, that Zuhair rahimahullah, that he mentioned that the hadith, it has been, he mentioned the first, the hukum, Sahih, Rawahu Abu Dawood, Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, Ahmad, and those are Khamsa. Then he mentioned Al-Hakim. So those are the ones who have narrated this hadith that are constitute Al-Khamsa, and also with Hakim. Then he mentioned something addition, where he mentioned Wallaf alladhi dhakarahu al-Hafiz. Then he mentioned, as for the wordings that have been mentioned by Hafid ibn Hajar rahimahullah, here he mentioned li Abi Dawood, that this wording is taken from Abu Dawood, wal Nasahi wal Hakim. So the wording of the hadith that have been mentioned here, this wording is the wording taken from those 3 sources, from those sources that have been mentioned. So this hadith, the wording is taken from Abu Dawood, he mentioned Nasahi, and also Al-Hakim. Then he mentioned lil hadith al-fadh ukhra, and also the hadith, this particular hadith, it have various wording, it have different wording. So this is just one of the wordings of the hadith, one of the wording of the hadith, but there's other wordings that are mentioned regarding this hadith. Then he mentioned وَطُرَقْ كَثِيرًا and Ibn Mas'ud. And also he mentioned that also this hadith, it comes by way of many ways upon Ibn Mas'ud. So you have different ways in which this hadith have been narrated upon Ibn Mas'ud. Then he mentioned وَهَذِهِ طُرَقْ. Then he mentioned, as for all these different ways that this hadith have been narrated upon Ibn Mas'ud, وَإِنْ كَانَ بَعْضُهَا قَدْ أُعِلْ, that some of these have been criticized. Some of these have been criticized. Then he mentioned إِلَّا أَنَّ الْأَمْرِ كَمَا قَالَ الْبَيْهَقِي فِي الْكُبْرَى. Then he mentioned, as for the matter, it is as stated by Al-Bayhaqi. Then he mentioned that Bayhaqi rahimahullah, he mentioned in his book Al-Kubra, إِذَا جُمِعَ بَيْنَهَا صَارَتْ حَدِيث بِذَلِكَ قَوِيًّا. So Bayhaqi rahimahullah is what he stated is that إِذَا جُمِعَ بَيْنَهَا, that if all these ways of the hadith, if they are compiled and gathered together, mentioned Sarah hadith بِذَلِكَ قَوِي, the hadith then becomes, it gives strength to each other and become hadith which is strong. So that's concerning what we mentioned regarding concerning of those who have so here in that check-in he gives some value some value information regarding the hadith. So the next of those regarding comparing regarding different check-in of the book, I will mention that there's many who have worked around this book Bulugh Maram. So as for the second of those who have worked regarding check-in of this book of Bulugh Maram, that will mention the second of those is concerning Al-Hallaq rahimahullah. So the check-in of Al-Hallaq rahimahullah, that he states when he mentioned this hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, when he mentioned to the end of the hadith, Rawahu Khamsa wa Sahahu al-Hakim. Then he mentioned here regarding in his footnotes, would it be number 3 mentioned, Akhrajahu, the hadith have been collected by Abu Dawood fi Sunan. So Abu Dawood in his Sunan, with Tirmidhi, and he mentioned the number, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, Ahmed, Wasahahu, Hakim fi Mustadrak. So that's the information he gave regarding coinciding what had been mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. So he mentioned Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, Ahmed in his Musnad as being the 5 books. I mentioned Al-Khamsa, and also in addition to those 5 he mentioned Sahahu al-Hakim fi Mustadrak. So the book of Hakim that he have graded hadith to be authentic, is the book is called Al-Mustadrak by Hakim alayhim jami'an rahimahullah. Then he mentioned regarding concerning Qultu. So then now he's going to give some additional information regarding takhrij of the hadith, regarding mentioning some of the other sources of the hadith. He mentioned Akhrajahu, also the hadith have been collected by Ad-Daraqutni fi Sunan. So Imam Ad-Daraqutni rahimahullah in his book As-Sunan, wal Bayhaqi, and also Al-Bayhaqi. Then he mentioned Wasahahu Al-Albani fi Irwa. Then also he mentioned that also Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah have authenticated hadith in his book Al-Irwa Al-Ghalil. Then he mentioned concerning other sources of Al-Albani, we went to the Wafi Sahih Abi Dawood, and also Shaykh Al-Albani also authenticated hadith in Sahih Abi Dawood. So that's concerning what he mentioned here regarding that particular hadith. So he mentioned one, the source is mentioned initially by Ibn Hajar. Then he did some additional sources, and of those additional sources he mentioned Ad-Daraqutni and also Al-Bayhaqi, and also he mentioned the ruling of Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala. That's concerning Al-Hallaq. The third of those who have done some checking on this book is this of concerning, this checking is by Shaykh Mahir Al-Fahl, one of the Mashaykh from Iraq, who have done many checks in books of hadith, and of those, the book Bulugh Maram. So Shaykh he mentioned here, or the one who have muhaqqiq of the book, he mentioned when he mentions hadith, that he mentioned hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, then he mentioned Rawahu Khamsa wa Sahahu Al-Hakim. Footnotes number 1, he mentioned Jaha. So his footnotes he mentioned Jaha min turakin idda, that is hadith come from many ways. La yas'a maqam li dhikriha. It is he would not go into detail in mentioning all those sources. So he would not go into detail in mentioning all these different sources of the hadith. ولكن جميعها, لكن all these sources لا يخلو من مقال. All these sources of the hadith, all these ways that this hadith have been reported, he mentioned لا يخلو من مقال, that all of them, that they are open for criticism. All of them have weaknesses. So meaning concerning لا يخلو من مقال, that each of these narration of the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, that they all have some defects. They all have some form of weakness. Then I mention ومنهم من حسن الحديث. Then I mention as some of the ulama of those who have all the hadith to be hasan بمجموعها, based upon all those hadith being combined together. Then he mentioned كالبيهقي, amongst those who have all the hadith to be مقبول hasan. He mentioned كالبيهقي, Ibn Abdul Barr, Ibn Abdul Hadi, Undur, Tanki, Nasb al-Raya, Talqis al-Abiyah. Then he mentioned some sources that one can go back to in which regarding as reference regarding what have been said by some of the ulama pertaining to this hadith. And he mentioned, so after that, so he mentioned that method and goes into Akhrajahu, now the source of this hadith, Ahmad, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Nasahi. Then he mentions, so those are Al-Khamsa, Ahmad, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, and Nasahi. If we were to compare, when he mentioned these 5 books, compared to the ones that we mentioned before. So the ones before they mentioned, it started with most, they started Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. But in this case, he started a different order, a different sequence in how he mentioned those 5 sources. So he mentioned, as for those 5 sources, Al-Khamsa, he started with Ahmed. Then he mentioned second, so he started with Ahmed, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, and Nasa'i. Why is this? Because the author, or the ones who have done the checking, that he have mentioned their names based upon their sanat al-wafat, based upon the time of their death. So he has somewhat take the approach of, he mentioned those sources of Kutub al-Khamsa, each of those sources based upon their time of their death. So who died first, he mentioned them first, in that sequence, in that order. So he mentioned them based upon time of death, in that order, and that's the way sometimes taken by some of the, by some. So he mentioned start with that system of the order in which the time of death. That's why a slight difference in how he mentioned Khutub al-Khamsa compared to the ones that we mentioned previous. Then he mentioned, additional to this, he mentioned Abu Yala wa Ibn Jarud, Tahawi fi Shar al-Mushkil, wal-Hakim wal-Bayhaqi. So he mentioned some additional sources that others did not mention. So others have mentioned Al-Bayhaqi, wa Daraqutni. Now you have added to this list Abu Yala, Ibn Jarud, and also Tahawi. So Imam At-Tahawi, that also have some books in Hadith, and those books, Shar al-Mushkil. Then he mentioned Al-Hakim wal-Bayhaqi. If also observing this Hadith, that the normal pattern and trend of the one who did the editing of this book, you'll always mention the hukm upon the hadith. But in this case that you mentioned, for example, the hadith mentioned Sahih, Akhrajatu Ahmed, that's the hadith that comes after, Bukhari, Muslim. So, and the reason that you'll normally start will mention the hukm upon the hadith, then mention the source of the hadith. In this case, it didn't openly mention a clear hukm upon the hadith, because the hadith is somewhat on a discussion between the ulama, on a discussion. But when he mentioned also those, when he mentioned وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ حَسَنَ الْحَدِيث, that kind of indicate that maybe he's more inclined towards the view of those who all the hadith to be hasan. But as he mentioned, those of the ulama who have all the hadith to be hasan, so it seems, Allahu Alam, that he's inclined towards the rule that the hadith is hasan. So that's concerning, that's kind of somewhat matters to be mindful of regarding when reading the books of the ulama and their style and slight differences that what we might find. So the next and the final of those who have made some work on this book of the fourth is regarding concerning with the Mashaykh from Al-Yemen. So Shaykh Al-Ba'dani, regarding concerning his checking, and also you have an explanation, also so you have a checking of the book, Bulugh al-Maram, and also he went on to explain, and we benefit and we use that checking, which is concerning the checking which is called Fath al-Alam. That's the one that we use a lot regarding explaining some of these hadith. So when he mentioned the hadith, the Shaykh وفقه الله, that he mentioned regarding concerning, he mentioned the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud ta'ala anhu, where he mentioned that إذا اختلف متباعيا الحديث رواه خمسة وصححه الحاكم. So again, as for what he mentioned, he somewhat compared to the previous ones, he went into more detail. So he went into more detail compared to the ones previously mentioned. So he went into close to a page and a quarter, or a page and more than a page and a half regarding this discussion. More than a page and a half regarding this discussion. So he mentioned, when he mentioned this hadith, he mentioned first, which is footnote number 3 in this book, he mentioned Sahih. So kind of somewhat to give his final judgment and rule upon the hadith is Sahih. Then he mentioned Akhrajahu Ahmed, Abu Dawood, Nasahi, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, wal Hakim, wa ghayrihim. And he mentioned those ones. Well, that the hadith is mentioned by those 5, and also Hakim, they mentioned, and others. Without listing the others, they mentioned, and others. Then they mentioned, wal hadith bil laf al madhkur inda Abu Dawood, Nasahi, wa al Hakim. So again, also what have been mentioned by some before, that this hadith, the wording that is mentioned here in this book of Bulugh Maram, that this wording can be taken from Abu Dawood, Nasahi, and also Al-Hakim. So this wording is not the exact wording of this hadith that is found in, for example, in At-Tirmidhi. But same meaning, but not the exact word for word as mentioned here. So as for the word for word meaning here, is that which is taken from Abu Dawood, Nasahi, and also Al-Hakim. Then he mentioned, وَغَيْرِهِمْ مِنْ طُرُقٍ من طريق عبد الرحمن ابن قيس ابن محمد ابن أشعث عن أبيه عن جده عن ابن مسعود به. So that he can somewhat give the isnad of this, one of the isnad of this hadith. And then he can somewhat mention isnaduhu da'if. As for this isnad, that it is weak. So this isnad, with this wording from those sources, then the hadith, it is weak. Then he went into a discussion regarding the hadith, these had the different wordings of the hadith, but all of them being weak, all of them being somewhat weak. Then he mentioned the conclusion regarding then he mentioned والحاصل مما تقدم أن الحديث صحيح والله أعلم وأعلم Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So his final conclusion, the hadith, it is da'if. Then he mentioned tanbih, a caution, that in some riwayah istahlaf al-bahi, that is for the person who is the seller, that he should take a oath. Then he mentioned لم أراها إلا في طريق أبي عبيدة عن أبي, that only one of the narrators who's the tariq of Abi Ubaidah and Abihi, that they somewhat have added this wording, and he mentioned that this wording, this extra wording, is also, it is not authentic. It is not authentic with this extra wording, but as for the word that is mentioned here, it is overall authentic. So that's concerning the general ruling of the ulama pertaining to this particular hadith. The hadith, by way of different chains, it is somewhat weak. So the ulama have somewhat mentioned the hadith, it is of those who are mentioned here, that the hadith under discussion. So in conclusion, that the aqwal of the ulama pertaining to this hadith were mentioned. As for the aqwal of the ulama, in summary, that what can be taken concerning that of the ulama who all the hadith regarding all its chain, all the narration of the hadith, that they are weak. But by way of them being combined together, that they give strength and made the hadith reach a level of Hasan. So, after aqwal of the ulama regarding this hadith, of those who mention hadith is not authentic, of those who are mentioned hadith, it is not clearly authentic. قال إمام شافعي رحمه الله في قديم في رواية زعفراني حيث قال هذا حديث منقطع لا عالم أحد يسله عن ابن مسعود وقد جاء من غير وجه. So Al-Shafi rahimullah, that is take on the hadith, that he mentioned that هذا حديث منقطع. The hadith is of some munqati, it is something, it is a broken chain. That the chain of the hadith is broken. لا عالم أحد يسله. And he doesn't know of anyone who have mentioned hadith with a connected chain. That's concerning the hadith, Imam Shafi rahimahullah. Also, Hafid ibn Abdul Barr, wa Darakutni, wa Ibn Jawzi, that they mention hadith of weakness. قال ابن منذر أو منذري قال المنذري في مختصر السنن قال وقد روي هذا حديث من طرق كلها لا تثبت. That this hadith have been mentioned by many sources, many different ways, but all of them is not authentic, all of which is not authentic. Then also you find that قال ابن ملقن رحمه الله وبالجملة, and in general, in summary, كل طرق or كل طرق, all these different ways, هذا حديث لا تخلو من علة, that all the ways that this hadith have been narrated all of them is not free from any form of criticism or any form of weakness. So all the narrations of this hadith, they all of weakness. Then you find some of the ulama that I've mentioned, so based upon this, so all these narrations are weak. But you find that a group of ulama that have somewhat authenticated the hadith based upon, they mention, يَقَوِّ بَعْضُهَا بَعْض, that some of these narrations, that they give strength to each other. Of those who have done so, that I mentioned, Al-Hakim, fi al-Mustadrak, Bayhaqi. Also, just to add, also even the narration of At-Tirmidhi also mentioned hadith al-Mursal. So At-Tirmidhi, rahimahullah, when he mentioned hadith is Mursal. Then of those of authentic hadith, that Al-Hakim fi Mustadrak, Bayhaqi, as he mentioned, also Ibn Abil Hadi, Al-Hanbali. So those among the ulama were somewhat, and also a Sheikh Albani of contemporary, and also Sheikh Shu'aib Arnaout, also they also have authenticated hadith, or hadith to be Hassan, based upon its various chains. So you find that Sheikh Arnaout, he mentioned regarding the book Sunan Abi Dawood, قال الشعيب Hassan bituraki, that hadith is said to be Hassan based upon all the chains being combined together. وهذا إسناد ضعيف, but as for the hadith mentioned Abu Dawood, it is weak. As for the isnad mentioned in Abu Dawood in his Sunan, that isnad is weak, but with all the other narrations or ways the hadith have been narrated, that all of those gives some strength to each other, where the hadith is said to be Hassan. So that's concerning, in summary, regarding the rule of this hadith. So that's concerning. So of the ulama who have mentioned hadith, it is Hassan, based upon there's weakness, but all those is not severe weaknesses in the hadith. So this is the case of the ulama of hadith, that some hadith they have weakness, but because they come by way of many narration, at times they may give strength to each other. But that also is within the science, where some hadith may strengthen each other, and in some cases the hadith with weakness are not able to give strength to each other because of the severity of the weakness. If it is a slight weakness, then they can give strength to each other. But if they are adaf shadid, then they do not. So that's concerning some matters pertaining to the hadith. As for now, the next matter regarding concerning that, discussing concerning the meaning of the hadith. So this particular hadith, as mentioned here by Sheikh Bassam, when he discussed the hadith, he mentioned mufradat al-hadith. As for the mufradat, meaning the meaning of the hadith, and certain wording that he wished to clarify. So the hadith mentioned that the hadith states concerning that إذا اختلف متبايعان meaning concerning the buyer and the seller. So mutabayan mean that if there's a difference that have occurred between the buyer and the seller, وَلَيْسَ بَيْنَهُمَا بَيِّنَةٌ, and there's no bayina between them, meaning there's nothing that nothing that can be used as a proof or evidence regarding what they had agreed upon regarding that contract. So if they went into a transaction and they didn't have anything that was as a proof regarding their contract, so if there's an absence of a type of proof, then it mentioned فَالْقَوْلِ, then he mentioned there al-bayyina. If there's a difference that arise between them, then I mentioned al-bayyina could be concerning like some form of proof or evidence that they can use to prove what they had agreed upon, and that will kind of somewhat split the difference, break the difference between them, and be the thing to be judged between them. But if there's none, then it goes back to, as we'll discuss. Then also he mentioned that Sheikh Bassam, rahimahullah, when he discussed al-bayyina, he mentioned bayna from tibyan, and he discussed concerning, but that mean concerning linguistic meaning. But he mentioned regarding concern that either this bayyina, either can be mentioned qarar, that is some form of qarar, there's some form of something that is that one party or both kind of somewhat did acknowledge that this was the case. So there's some form of acknowledgement or some form of admittance that this was what we agreed upon and this was the contract, then that holds as a form of proof. Or a form of, you mentioned shuhud, or others, people who acted as witness. So there was others who were present and were witness to the contract and the agreement. So that is used, that is also a form of bayyina. That's a form. So either admittance by one party or both, or by way of clear proof by way of having witnesses present. or in today's time something have been written, then those things are used as a form of a proof, or they say a contract. Then they mention regarding فالقول, if there's an absence of any form of evidence, they mention فالقول ما يقول رب السلع. So رب السلع is the person who is the seller, the person who still owns the item, the owner, the original owner of the item. So one will fall back onto his qawl, onto his statement. So when we take his statement, if there's a difference between the buyer and the seller, then he mentioned أو يتتاركان, or both decide that they would discontinue with the business transaction. So based upon this, both have decided that they would forfeit the business transaction. So those are the way to look at the matter. So that's concerning the general meaning of the hadith. I mentioned sila, meaning concerning the item, Rabbi sila, the seller, the owner of the item, Sa'ibu sila. So that's concerning that matter regarding concerning the hadith. So after that discussion regarding the meaning of the hadith, now we go into the actual masail. So we're going to go into the actual masail that relates to this particular hadith. The first of those things that they discuss concerning this hadith, as stated by Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah in Ishar Bulugh Maram, that he mentioned by stating as a way to open this discussion, قال لو نظرنا إلى أموم هذا hadith, if we were to look at the general meaning of the hadith, لقلنا, that they will say كل اختلافين يقع بين متباعين, that every difference that occur between the buyer and the seller, فالقول قول البائع, then we will rely upon the statement of the seller based upon the general meaning of the hadith. If there's a difference between a buyer and the seller, then we should rely upon the statement of the seller. Then I mentioned فلم يحلف فإن لم يحلف ترى that day, if both didn't make an oath, then I mentioned that the contract is to be dissolved. The contract is to be dissolved. Then I mentioned ولكن هذا حديث, and this is a shahid. Then I mentioned ولكن, but هذا حديث ليس على إطلاق باتفاق العلماء, that this hadith is not to be taken by this general ruling in all cases, and that's agreed upon the ulama. This hadith is not be taken and applied to all cases, and that is the ittifaq. That's an agreement between the ulama. That's an agreement between the ulama. So it shows regarding understanding concerning certain nusus, that a person, and reading hadith directly, that a person go back to the aqwal of the ulama to give him a better understanding as to what is actually intended, and also those things that are agreed upon or maybe disagreed upon between the ulama. So it's important that a person in studying of hadith that to read the books that explain hadith, so as to give some clarity regarding points of difference and also area of agreement between the ulama. So even though the hadith seems what the hadith states, but the ulama also disagree that the hadith is not to be taken by face value in all circumstance, where in every case the seller, the owner of the seller, the owner of the item, that his word is to be taken over that of the customer. Then I mentioned فإن العلماء لم يتفقوا على أن القول قول الباهي في كل صورة, that the ulama have agreed upon that in not all cases that the seller word is to be taken in certain situation. So that's concerning the shahid, and also to emphasize also before Ibn Taymiyyah al-Shawkani. So before Ibn Taymiyyah al-Shawkani rahimahullah, I've mentioned where he stated فَعْلَمْ, to know أنه لم يذهب, that indeed إلى عمل به في جميع صور اختلاف, that to know that one is not to act upon this hadith in all cases as mentioned by the hadith. So it's not to be taken, this hadith not to be taken by face value in all cases, that you have difference between أحد فيما عالم بل اختلفوا في ذلك اختلافا طويل, that you find in certain cases that اختلاف between ulama regarding some cases regarding these type of differences that occur between the buyer and the seller. So overall, Shawkani wa Ibn Taymiyyah stating that this hadith is not to be applied in all cases across the board, where if there's a difference between the buyer and the seller, that we should just take the statement of the seller and disregard the buyer in all cases. That not the correct approach and not the view of the ulama on this matter. So, in now going into specific cases regarding that the ulama have discussed, or some of the cases the ulama have discussed regarding this hadith. The first of those masail is regarding إذا اختلف البائع والمشتري, that you find a difference between the buyer and the seller في ثمن السلة. So a difference between the buyer and the seller regarding the price of an item, of a commodity. So buyer and seller disagree regarding the price of the item, but overall they agree upon the transaction in general principle, but they now disagree regarding the price to be the price of the item. In this scenario, they mention two cases. And so in this case, they mention two scenarios. So in this case, regarding that if the disagreement between the buyer and the seller regarding an item, then they mention two scenarios. The first scenario that is mentioned, it said that the first scenario is regarding that if the seller, the item, it still remains, it's still intact. The item is still intact. It hasn't been used or gone. It has been used away, or the item is still not been damaged or lost. The item is still intact. The item is still intact. So they mention that regarding concerning in that case, that they mention regarding that the item is still intact, they mention ذهب أكثر إلى أنهما يتحالفان ويترادان. That jumhur of the ulama, many of the ulama, have taken the position that the item is still intact, and there's a difference regarding the price of the item. Then I mentioned that both buyer and seller is to take an oath, and also for them to discontinue with the transaction. So both will take an oath regarding their claim, then also they would discontinue with the transaction. And I mentioned that's a call of Ahmed, Ibn Hanbal, Imam Shafi, Ishaq, Al-Thawri, and also Abu Hanifa wa Malik fi riwayah. So those are concerning of some of those who are said to be jumhur, or akthar of them, who says that in this case that both buyer and seller both take an oath, and also to discontinue the transaction, not to continue through the transaction. And that's a view that is taken by Ahmed bin Hanbal, Imam Shafi, Ishaq, Al-Thawri, Imam Abu Hanifa, and also Imam Malik fi riwayah, in one narration upon Imam Malik alayhim rahmatullah jami'an. What they mean concerning that picture, given a picture of this, they say surah of this situation, they mention, for example, that the seller, the owner of the item, the seller is to say that I'm selling this item for such price. I'm selling you this item for such price. Then the one who's buying, the buyer, would say, I am buying it, I want the item for such price. The seller saying that I have sold you this item, or I sold you this item for such price. I sold this item for £100. And the buyer is saying, no, I bought this item for £80. So there's a difference regarding the exact price of the item. One saying 100, and that's the buyer, and the seller saying something else. So one saying one price and the other saying another. So the buyer saying one price and the seller saying a different price. So they disagree. So on this matter, they mentioned that who should we accept their word? Who should? So in this case, they mentioned that, so based upon that, Jumhur hold that in this scenario, that both should take an oath and discontinue this transaction. So that's concerning that matter. And so the reason because of this, they said, because both of them are making claim and claim against each other, making a claim. So based upon this, so because both are making a claim, and also a claim against the other person, this one making a claim, the seller making a claim against the buyer, and the buyer making a claim against the seller. So I mentioned that with this, discontinue the transaction. Discontinue with the transaction, and both also to take an oath. That's concerning the view of those ulama. A second view on this matter, the view of Abu Thawr, Zufr, and also Imam Malik, and another narration. So Imam Malik, another narration, that they mentioned that their view in this case is concerning that a difference between the price of the item between the buyer and the seller, that they mentioned that in this matter right إلى أن القول قول المشتري, that we should rely upon the statement of the one who's the buyer. So the one who's the buyer, because he's the one purchasing the item, the purchaser, we should take his statement also for him to make an oath. So we will take an oath and we will take his statement. And said the reason because the seller, he normally is going to claim a price that is much higher. So the seller is going to say it's £100, and the buyer is saying no, it's £80. So he's claiming something which is a more higher rate cost. So in this case, there's a little bit, so we kind of the buyer is saying that what you're demanding, what you're claiming is too higher than what I believe to have paid or supposed to have to pay. So because of this extra payment, then you take the word of the buyer according to this particular view. As I mentioned, is qawl ala al-munkir. So the qawl go back to the person who's saying, no, this additional, this 100, extra 20, it was not what I agreed to. So they said you take the qawl of the person who's saying, who's making the inkar, the person who's the munkar, the person who's rejecting this extra cost. So that's concerning their approach regarding that matter. The third view on this matter is the qawl of Ibn Mas'ud, وشعبي وأحمد في الرواية. So those three of the ulama, Ibn Mas'ud among the Sahaba, Ash-Shabi, and also another narration on Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, where they can somewhat take the view that ذهب إلى أن القول قول البائع, that one should rely upon and take the statement of the ba'ih, which is the seller. So one take the view of the seller of the item, بدون يمين, without him making an oath, without him taking an oath. So you take his statement without him also taking an oath. Or they can just decide to discontinue with the transaction. Discontinue the transaction. So if either take the statement of the seller or discontinue with the transaction. And I mentioned that because they realize that is more in line with the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud that we just mentioned. Is more in line with the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud that we should take the qawl of Rabbi Sila, who is the seller of the item, over that of the buyer. So that's concerned that qawl. And they mentioned, the dalil is the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, and the author here of this explanation that is more inclined towards this view. And he mentioned that Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah, that he mentioned هذا قول أقوى, that a qawl regarding the third view, that we should take the statement of that of the seller of the seller of the item over that of the buyer, based on the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, or to discontinue the business transaction. Then says no, Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah, that's based upon the zahir, what is apparent from the hadith, then that is the more stronger view on this matter. And also others I mentioned that this is the view of Ibn Uthaymin, the view of Ibn Taymiyyah. This is the view of Ibn Taymiyyah. So that's concerning that particular scenario. The second scenario regarding that, still regarding that buyer and seller disagree regarding the price of the item. So we mentioned the first scenario. Now the second scenario regarding this matter, that they mentioned the second scenario, that the item now, in this case, has been ruined or destroyed or used up. So the item now is not available. In the first scenario, the item was available. So in this scenario now, the item is available. Or, the item is not available. So in this case, when the item is not available, then the ulama, they disagree. So of the first view regarding concern that they disagree regarding the price of the item, but the item now in this scenario is not available. The ulama, they mention regarding concern that on this matter, that they mention qawl al-mushtari, mal yamini, that in this case that we take the view of the person who's the buyer of the item, and also he does the yamin, he takes an oath. And that's the view that is taken by Ibrahim al-Nakai, Sufyan al-Thawri, and also al-Awza'i. So, and also Abu Hanifa, and also the view of Ahmad al-Riwaya on Imam Ahmad So al-riwayah on Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, and others, and also Imam Malik, of the ulama that are well known. So of those who hold that, and this scenario, the item, they disagree regarding the price of the item, but the item is not available, then of those who take the view that one should take the view of the buyer, and of those of that view, Ibrahim al-Nakai, Sufyan al-Thawri, Awza'i, Abu Hanifa, riwayah, a narration, and Imam Ahmed, and also qala bihi al-Layth ibn Sa'd, and also Imam Malik. So of the ulama, and I mentioned regarding concern that not based upon some narration I already mentioned, was sila qa'ima, that the silaf is still available. If the item is still available, then you should take the view of that I mentioned concerning of the purchaser, the one buying the item. As for the second view, so and they have their ta'alil that they gave to this matter. So they mention because of because the person who is denying the excess price is the person who's the purchaser. So you take his view. So you take the view of the purchaser because he's the one who's denying this extra charge. The second view on this matter is that they all have to know both yatahalafan, that both is to take the al-halaf ويترادان, and also for them to discontinue fasq this matter, that yataradan meaning that he should discontinue the business transaction. That's the view that is taken by Imam Shafi, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, Sahib Abu Hanifa, Ashhab al-Maliki, and also the view that is mashhur, that is more famous, renowned, on Imam Ahmed, and also the apparent view of Ibn Taymiyyah. So a view of Ibn Taymiyyah. But also said yurad al-mushtari qima. But also they mentioned that, so in this case that also that if the item, because the item is not available, that the person who's the buyer, then he must give the equivalent. He has to give the compensation, the equivalent compensation for the item. So that's concerning those aqwal of the ulama. So their view is that concern that that's concerning that second view, and this view that Ibn Uthaymeen is more inclined towards the second view. Ibn Uthaymeen, that both take an oath and that they return the item, and then that discontinue the business transaction, and because they didn't, because the item had been not available, then in that case that the buyer has to compensate the seller. The buyer has to compensate the seller for the item. As for that compensation, so that's concerned. So as for those who take the view regarding that he is to be compensated, which is the second view, that they mention regarding concern this compensation or the equivalent compensation, that they mention that what is suitable, satisfactory, that one, that the compensation should not exceed what the seller is asking for, nor should it go below what the buyer is claiming. So meaning that if the seller is saying that the item is £100, then one should not exceed £100 as compensation. And if the other one is saying that it is £80, one should not go below 80. So it's in between 80 and 100, not more nor less of those two figures. So that's concerning that matter. As for in the case of al-halif, in case of as anyone need to make the halif, in that case that whichever one made the halif first, as some ulama stipulate that the one who the seller should start with the yameen first, make the oath first, then that's that can be done. But also if the buyer was to take the oath first, then it's okay. So whichever take the oath first, then that is satisfactory, that is acceptable. A next matter discuss that a next of the masail I discuss that if the seller was to say, I sold you this item, for £100. Then the buyer is saying now to the seller that no, rather you sold me the item with another item, meaning that the buyer that the seller said, I sold you an item for £100. I sold you a jacket for £100. Then the buyer is saying now to the seller, no, you sold me 2 jackets for £100. Hopefully it is clear. So the buyer saying to the seller, I bought 2 jackets from you for £100. But the seller is saying, no, I sold you only 1 jacket for £100. So in those differences between buyer and seller, where one is claiming that only 1 item for that price, and the other is saying, no, it is 2 items for that price. In that scenario, I mentioned that the madhab of the Hanabila wa Abi Hanifa, that one relies upon qawl al-ba'i, mal yamin, that one rely upon the statement of the seller with also him taking yamin, with him also taking an oath. So the qawl of the Hanabila and Abu Hanifa, then one will take the statement of the seller, but also he has to take an oath. Because the seller is rejecting the disagreement that this additional item, you know, yes, I sold you 1 item, but as for the additional item of the second jacket, I didn't sell you it for that price. So this extra item is where the dispute revolves around. So in that case, they said take his view because he's the one who actually sold the item. He's the one who sold the item. The item was in his possession initially. So you take the seller view. But Imam Shafi rahimahullah take a different position, that both should take an oath because of difference that they have regarding the additional item. So both should take an oath, both they mention here, both should take an oath. Both should take an oath, but didn't mention it, which need to be looked into. Did also additional that they should discontinue a business transaction. They mentioned يتحالفان, that both should take an oath. لأنهما اختلفا في إحدى عوض العقد. They mentioned there's a difference, but didn't clarify regarding that. Taking an oath, but what else to be done additionally? Are they to continue that? Which view to take? He didn't state that clearly. So Allah, so that's concerning. But he mentioned الذي يظهر لي, concerning the one who have explained Fathul Alam. He mentioned that the first view is the one that is more inclined towards. He mentioned الذي يظهر لي أن القول الأول أرجح, that the first view is the one that is more inclined towards. That in this case, the view of the Hanabila and the Hanafiya, that one takes the view of the sale of the item. Regarding this, in this case where the person saying that, claiming that 2 items were sold for 1 price, but the actual seller is saying, no, I only sold you 1 item, not 2 items. So in that case, you take the view of the seller as he's the one who originally is the possessor of the item. Originally. The next matter that they discuss regarding this matter they discuss other matter regarding concerning if they disagree regarding al-qadr, the amount. So the amount regarding that, both are going to the agreement, and this is regarding concerning that the amount after the item have been destroyed or been used, after the item is not now available, but they had there was a business transaction, and the item was given and the item been used, but now they disagree regarding how much was given. So in that matter, you have a difference between the ulama. That, for example, mean concerning the amount, the number of things that were given, I mentioned that if the seller was to say, I'm selling this item, that I'm selling you 2 sheep. And the buyer said, no, it's 1 sheep. So one claiming 2 sheep was sold, which is the seller saying, I sold you 2 sheep. And in this case, the buyer is saying, no, it's one sheep. Then who do we take? And the sheep now is not available. Who views what they mentioned concerned in this case, that they mentioned that of the ulama, qawl al-mushtari, that one should take the view of, take the qawl of, take the statement of the purchaser, the one who bought the item. One should take the view of the, as is claiming that he's making inkar, he's disagree regarding this additional item, which is these, so the additional sheep that is being included by way of the seller. So they mentioned that he should take the view of that of the buyer. So that's concerning of those matters that they discuss regarding some of those matters. Yeah, other things that is discussed regarding this matter. That another matter that sometimes occur that they mentioned here, and will they mentioned that إذا اختلف عند من حدث العيب في السلع. So the matters regarding concern that no, buyer and seller, they disagree regarding which of them is responsible for a fault in the item. So the item now, it appears that there's a fault in the item. Who's responsible for that fault? But we have, if one want compensations, they disagree regarding who's responsible for the fault in the item. Is the buyer or the seller? So they mentioned that you have different scenarios regarding this case, regarding who's responsible or take responsibility if there's a fault that have come out, that have been noticed in the item, that they mentioned regarding concern that you have different scenarios. They mentioned 3 scenarios. One, the scenario where that دلت القرينة على أن العيب حدث عند الأول, where there's somewhat strong supporting evidence that indicates, that leans towards that the fault, the responsibility goes back to the to the seller, goes back to the seller, the original owner. For example, I mentioned that a person brought you as the seller a pair of shoe. And when you open the box, when you took the box, and we gave that when the exchange was made, and you took the box, and you look into the box, and you looked at in the shoe, one size is size 7, and the other is a size 8. So it's more likely, and the shoe is still in the box, is still wrapped, but when you look and open it, then you see that now one size is 7 and the other is 8. Difference in size of the shoe. So there's a fault. Or one of the size come without a lace. So it's more likely, and it's in the box, that the error, the fault, it came by way of the seller. So the responsibility lies upon him. In that case, as more lean towards that the fault came from his side. A second scenario is that the evidence, it may support more that the fault rests upon the buyer, the person who purchased the item. So in that case, for example, that a person bought a sheep. So the seller delivered the item to the buyer, bought her outside. The buyer sent the sheep inside to the pen. Then soon after, someone came back and said that the animal, it's bleeding. It has a cut. It has an injury. So when they went, both buyer and seller, to look at the animal to see, okay, what happened, they did found that the animal is bleeding. It has a cut. But this cut is fresh. The blood is still pouring. So it's more likely that it occur after the buyer received the item, which is the sheep, because the cut seemed very fresh. We're still bleeding and blood still pouring from the animal. So this would have been something noticeable from the time of the exchange. But if it seems very fresh, then it goes back to the purchaser, the one who purchased the item, which is the buyer. So he would take the responsibility for the fault. And the third scenario where there's no evidence to prove this way or that way, which of them is responsible. So both, there's no evidence to clearly indicate as to which of the two the responsibility lies upon them, or which one. So in that case, they mention regarding concern of the ulama, if you don't know who is the one, is upon the buyer or the seller, then of the ulama, they disagree regarding concerning a jumhur of the ulama, that they take the call that in that case that you don't know who the fault lies upon whom, then it goes back to that the fault it goes upon that you take the call of the seller. As he's the one who's the original owner, possessor of the item. So you will take that he's the one that is in the right, and that the error, the fault, it lies upon the buyer, as in most cases, ordinarily, when an item is passed by way of the seller, the owner, to the buyer, that the item is in proper condition, without any fault. So you take the call of the owner of the item, the seller of the item, over that of the buyer. That's concerning qawl al-jumhur of the ulama, and others who take a different position. But that's the qawl al-jumhur of the ulama regarding that. You take the view of the owner, who is the seller of the item, over that of the buyer of the item, as the item will be ordinarily delivered where everything is intact. So that's concerning that view. But you find that the Hanabila take the view concerning that the person take the view of the buyer, and also he takes a yameen. The buyer, as now he's the one who's disagreeing regarding that the item was not delivered correctly, was not delivered properly. So that's concerning, but Ibn Sayyid rahimahullah, that is more inclined toward the view of the Jumhur, contrary to the view of the Hanabila. So that's concerning of those matters that are mentioned. So in that matter, that anyone, they mention that that's concerning of those matters that relates to some of the ahkam that can be taken from this particular hadith, from this hadith of Ibn Mas'ud. So we mentioned initially regarding concerning the asl of the hadith, the ruling of the hadith, that is a discussion between ulama, that the hadith is, all these chains are weak, but of the ulama who have mentioned that when all these chains are combined, all the isnad are ways of the hadith are combined together, that they give strength. So this of those hadith where even though there's some weakness, but the ulama somewhat are unified in a majority regarding acting upon the hadith, even though the hadith have some weakness. And we have discussed concerning different masail that can be taken under what circumstance or cases where one would take the view of the buyer, and under what circumstance a person would take the view of the seller. It varies depending on the different scenario and situation. So the hadith is not to be taken by face value, where in all cases of differences between a buyer and a seller, one should take the view of the seller. So with that, inshallah ta'ala, we will end this discussion. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه السبيل والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.